I think this is the concluding day, and we have two great panelists with us, Jeet Thayil and Sheba Thayil. And the topic of today's discussion is Elsewhereans, Jeet's latest book, and he says this as a documentary novel. And the novel is autobiographical in nature, partly, and he himself has written that he has added some fictional elements to make it a novel. So the very interesting part for me, I as an working journalist, the book is a tribute to T.J.S. George sir, Jeet's father, and one of the great editors of our times. So I was fortunate to be part of the team of the New Indian Express, where he was the editor for a while, and I have closely watched the work of T.J.S. sir, and for me as a young journalist, he was one of the guiding lights and inspirational figures. So I treat this as a very I treated this as a privilege and fortune to moderate this discussion today. So let's start with Jeet. Jeet, my question, like is documentary novel. Is there any model for such a novel globally? And so why you chose to write a documentary novel?
I had considered writing a book of nonfiction, a memoir, a kind of a family saga, but there were so many things I would not have been able to include if it had been purely a memoir or purely nonfiction. When you write in terms of a fictional narrative, what you can do is you can go into the heads of the characters in a way that you cannot do when it's nonfiction. If it's a memoir, if you're sticking to the journalistic narrative, you can't go into somebody's head and think in their point of view and look at motivations and backstories. So as I was writing it, I came across so much material that had to be put across in a way that we think of as fiction. But it wasn't entirely fictional. There was so much that was non-fictional in the story. There were photographs of my parents, of the places we lived in as we were growing up. So I didn't know what to call it. It wasn't a memoir. It wasn't a novel. There were documents. There were photographs. There were diary pages. There were letters. There was a poem that had been edited on the page, a Baudelaire translation in English with its Malayalam translation written above each line by my uncle. So these are documents, and I thought one way to get around this problem was to call it a documentary novel. Other than that, I've also always been interested in the idea of writing a book that would really perplex bookshop owners so that they wouldn't know where to place it. Do we place this in the fiction section, or do we place this in the non-fiction section? I wanted them to have to really worry about this for a while, and then maybe give it a special place near the cash register. Of course, that hasn't happened, but...
Can I...
So I'll introduce. So Sarada ma'am is also joining us. Sarada ma'am, all of you know her, and she's an avid reader of Jeet Thayil, and Elsewhereans also she has read and completed. So she can join me. She is also joining me to question.
Well,
Jeet.
actually, this is a continuation of the conversation that we started yesterday, in which we discussed both your poetry as well as a little bit of Elsewhereans. There's something that I noted, which you had mentioned. You say that I write for an ideal reader for whom the characters matter, for whom the story is more real than life. And going through Elsewhereans, we find that the story actually is your life. So for those who are not familiar, it's like you have the story of Thomas, you have the story of Amu, you have the story of Jeet himself, you have the story of Marcos, you have the story of your sister, and there are so many interwoven stories here. And it's, like I said, it feels like so hot to read because you are going deep inside private worlds. And these are not fictional private worlds. These are real private worlds. And it has been, how exactly, why would you want to have the world get to see that glimpse of everything, of not everything, but a lot about you?
It's very interesting that you find, as you did yesterday, you find quotes that I've completely forgotten about. And yeah, so thanks, I think. But yeah, this question about why you would want to put something so private into the public realm, bring out so much private matter and put it out for the judgment of strangers who may not always have your best interests at heart. It's a good question. I have no idea why I do it. But the thing is, I'm not the only one. I think all novelists do it. I think it was Naipaul who said that it's in fiction that you cannot lie.
No, but that's the thing, right? In every novel, no matter what the autobiographical tinge that you carry with it, there is obfuscation. There is obfuscation. I mean, you literally bring in of course, the pattern and the story of your life, which is it's crisscrossing. So you don't have a chronological order in which the story goes, but there is a consistency. There is a consistency in the voice. So each of the voices, you mentioned that they are points of view, but the points of view, there is an external narrator who is putting the spotlight on this person, and the spotlight not just on the environment of the person, on the context and where they go through, but also on what is happening inside. And and that tone of narrative actually seems to be, no matter who the person, that tone is very consistent. Would you like to explain a little bit about how you got there and why you did it this way?
I realized that I had a lot of material about the life that my parents lived, which was quite an extraordinary life in the sense that they traveled a lot. But other than that, it was a pretty ordinary life for a Malayali couple that at that particular time. They got married, and my father started to work the year of independence as a journalist in 1947 in Bombay. So it was an extraordinary moment in India's history. We had, my mother, in fact, had obsessively saved every piece of paper from those years, the diaries, the photographs. And I had...
attractive women in my father's drawer stand.
don't think everyone heard that.
No, they have heard that.
Yeah, so, there was interesting material there that I'd always felt that it was a kind of a duty of mine to put it down. And the point is, I had to ask my parents' permission. Because this was, there were private details about their lives, about their stories, and a lot of it fictionalized in a way that I hope the reader won't be able to tell which is fiction and which is nonfiction. And when I did ask permission of my parents, my father, being reckless when it comes to literature, agreed immediately. He was very happy with the idea, actually. My mother, being much wiser and having had the experience of me having written, earlier, and having been burnt by Narcopolis in particular,
Yes.
was much more cautious, and she didn't give her permission right away. She knew what was probably going to happen, but eventually, there was no question that she would refuse. And I think the epigraph that begins this novel is something she would agree with wholeheartedly, and that is, when a writer is born into a family, the family is finished.
Also, I just, can you hear? Yeah. Yeah, I just also wanted to remind Jeet that when he wrote Narcopolis and gave a book reading in Bangalore, my mother said to him, Eda Jeete, please, that one page, don't read. Don't read that one page. And it was that one page that he read at that book reading. So she was used to it.
And Shiva, my question to you
No,
is...
wait. I would like to, because to take you on something you said, you want to blur the lines between fiction and reality, but I would like to put you on the spot and ask whether that second visit to Vietnam, to Saigon, to the lady who is on the motorcycle, I forget her name, but was that fiction or real?
I could tell you, but if I tell you, I'll have to kidnap you and get a vow of silence. And I'm leaving that
But at least
spoken.
about the Saigon, that journey through the tunnels in Saigon, that was just stratospheric. The way you went through it, what you took what you took the readers through also, and I think it also links so beautifully with the idea of alienation, isolation, ghosts.
That journey, the description of that journey from Saigon to Hanoi by road over 6 days, that
And
I
the tunnel.
actually did.
Yeah.
And the tunnel part,
tunnel.
I did go into the tunnel. And being claustrophobic, I don't take elevators, as my sister will testify. Being claustrophobic, being in those tunnels, I understood what it was like to live in those tunnels indefinitely. And the way the Vietnamese had designed these tunnels, it was an actual miracle of engineering in many ways. There are connecting tunnels. There are parts that are purely for medical facilities, like mini hospitals under the ground. Then there are other tunnels that connect to an entire other system of tunnels a mile away. And it was just brilliantly designed. And all of the tunnels are just large enough to crawl through. You can't walk. It becomes very claustrophobic. And what struck me about the tunnels of Cu Chi, especially in Saigon, was the fact that while you're inside, you can feel the spirits of the people who have passed through there and what happened to them and how it must have been to live there and to the struggle, this tiny sliver of a country that managed to overthrow 2 onslaughts by colonial powers that had never quite been defeated to this day. And it just filled me with admiration, really. But at the same time, if you read that part, the section about the tunnels, for me, the most interesting bit there, again, is something that can only be described as fiction, because it's an empathetic idea of the souls that have vanished
and
there.
I would really love it, maybe later, if you could just read that passage.
Sure.
Sheba, you are also you're a character of the novel. You have stood witness.
I'm one sentence. One sentence in that novel. Very bad. He has to write Elsewhereans too.
I think that was a kindness on my part.
But still, you are a witness to what all happened, what all narrated in that novel. Now, I would like to hear from you in truthful criticism of the novel, and also how much part of it is fiction or how much is truth.
I think if I were to say which parts were fiction and which part were true, it would spoil the novel for you. That should be left up to your imagination.
You can give us a percentage or something approximate.
Maybe 20% truth, 80%
20%
fiction.
truth. Oh.
Yeah. But yeah, my
Only 1/5 of truth.
yeah. But my review of the novel would be one paragraph. When I started reading it, there was one paragraph where he's describing the death of a grandfather. It's one paragraph. You read that one paragraph, this book is something else.
Actually, I think that's one sentence, that paragraph.
Yeah.
So, Jeet, if I come to T.J.'s Jot, sir, so you have written a lot and you have spoken a lot about your relationship with sir. But I still want to, for the audience, I just want you to tell us about the relationship between you and T.J.'s Jot and how much he has influenced you in your writing.
I have to first off say that as a young man, I was only in conflict with my father. We didn't get along. He was a journalist, I was a poet. He told me several times that there's no future in poetry, you shouldn't write poetry. And this was the kind of advice I would expect to get from a shopkeeper, not a writer. And the thing is, and this is something
And
you should have known.
You mentioned that in the novel as well.
Right. The thing is, when you, as a father, I would know, I'm not one, but if I had a son who or a daughter who said they wanted to be a poet and write poetry, I know that the one thing you shouldn't say is don't write poetry, because they will write poetry. And you will become this figure that they work against, that, they, of course, I took it to another extreme. For me, for many years in my teens and my 20s, and even some of my 30s, my one and only mission in life was to hassle my father, was to cause him trouble in some way or the other. And we had a very confrontational relationship, nothing like his relationship with his daughter, who was, the apple of his eye.
Yeah, that's because my mother made up for it. The firstborn, the heir, he was everything to her.
So and then, of course, I had this idea of this father that I had to fight against. And I also had an idea of the family business was writing. And, in every business, each succeeding generation takes it a step forward, the business. And I knew, no offense to the journalists here, but I knew that poetry was about a dozen steps ahead of journalism as a form of writing. No question about it. And if any proof were needed for this statement, the point is, journalism makes money and poetry does not. And still, poets write poetry. That tells you everything you need to know. So we had this relationship through most of my youth and 30s. And then a very strange thing happened. As he grew older, he mellowed and he became a very sweet, supportive father, which, yeah.
So in the writing in the book, one gets the impression that you're very understanding of your father, but way more empathetic towards your mother. I mean, that's an impression that is coming through. Although he was the writer and she was the one who was carrying the business and the other interests of the family forward.
Yeah, that's true. She was like the glue, in the family. But empathy, I think, worked in both of them, And one thing they taught us was not to be judgmental. You could be judgmental about politicians, maybe, but you can't be judgmental about people. Give them some grace, give them some leeway. If they came to your house, treat them well, no matter what you thought about their politics or their moral character. Yeah.
Sheba, you followed the footsteps of TJSR and became a journalist.
Yes.
And there was one phase of your career where you had to work under him,
Yeah.
while he was the editor and you worked in the Bangalore desk of the New Indian Express.
Yes.
I would like to hear about that. How was he in office and how was your relation with him when you have to report to
Well,
him?
nobody will believe this, but in the office, we would pass each other on the corridor and no words were exchanged. And at home, never once did he discuss work. And the only question I asked him when I was working in the Express was, this editor, do you like him? And he looked at me like I'd grown 3 heads. And he said, what do you mean like? So that's when I understood, you work with people you don't like. You work with people you don't respect, And that's just one way of just doing your work, focusing on your work and carrying on. And also, he never told me what to do at the Indian Express. How to talk, who to talk to, who not, nothing. I made my own decisions, went ahead, doing my own thing. So he never brought work home. And another thing is he's so different in the office. so different in the house. He's not a communicative person. Comes from a family that's not communicative. It's just, wow, genetics, you know? But in the office, he was charming, he was pleasant, he talked non-stop. You hardly heard his voice at home, you know? So it was interesting for me to see that, you know, this is all part of his character. And I learned a lot just watching.
When you decided to quit Express, did you discuss the decision with him?
Never. He never gave pointers or anything. Like I said, he wasn't, you know, didn't tell you what to do. He would say, I don't think that's a good idea. You know, maybe you should rethink this. And, you know, Jeet and I, we've made mistakes in our lives there was no coming back from. But there was never a question of, get out of my house. How dare you do this, you know? Nothing. It was like a quiet support from the background. So, you know, I appreciate that, and I learned from it as a parent myself.
So I would like to ask a question, which is, because I do not know whether that part is fiction or based on reality, but which is about the imprisonment there in Elsewhereans.
Yeah, see, Jeet?
Yeah.
That's a question to you, I think.
Yeah, so, you know, where he goes to jail, and the sense that you get is that this is a person, and he's so accepting of it. There is, in that narrative, certainly there is so much of grace in the way you go through prison, you come out of it, and there is also this period of depression where you find that no matter how brilliant you are unable to get back into the circuit of journalism, and so this must, I'm sure, a bit of it at least is based on reality, and you must have gone through it. How was it?
In fact, most of that is real, and you know there are the documents to prove it as well. The letter that he wrote from Hazaribagh Central Jail in Bihar to my mother, but the point about that experience, by the way, the background to the story is there were these riots by students in Bihar, and he was the editor of a newspaper called Searchlight, and he took the side of the students and invited the students to write essays that he published in the newspaper explaining their point of view. And this angered the chief minister, whose name was K.B. Sahai, angered Sahai so much that he arrested him, had him sent to prison. He didn't spend much time in prison, I think less than a month, but it was the best career move of his life. He came out of jail, and there were telegrams from Indira Gandhi, from Krishna Menon. Krishna Menon came to defend him in court. He became a kind of a cause célèbre overnight. And from then, he was offered a job in Hong Kong as regional editor of Far Eastern Economic Review. It basically just made his career. But the interesting thing about that arrest, on the day that he was to be released, there's a photograph which is in the Elsewhereans of him garlanded by the students. And the interesting detail about that photo is he's wearing a suit. He's wearing a good suit, pressed. He knew there was going to be a photo op. My mother did not. She's wearing a house sari. She's quite bewildered by the cameras and all the attention. He's lapping it up. You know, he knew. He planned for it. He's a journalist. You know, yeah. So you know that was just it was a lesson in us. You know, before we knew anything about how media works and how to work the media, he had an intuitive understanding of it.
If I add to that, all through his career, he was a staunch opponent of authoritarianism. From the Searchlight episode to even his last column in Indian Express was against Modi and Shaw. So then I think you wrote in Constant Migraine about the Catch-22 episode when, as a teenager, he confiscated your books and he destroyed your books. So that contradicts himself. How can he be so authoritarian in your home?
That's the thing. I'm sure later he very much regretted because he had a point. I was reading books that a 14-year-old should not read, and he didn't like it. And for example, I had a copy of Catch-22 that he confiscated and destroyed twice. He did it the first time. I got a new copy. I got a new copy. He got rid of that. So I got a third copy, which I hid really well, And there were other books. I was reading Thus Spake Zarathustra, Nietzsche's book, which he objected to. He said I was much too young. And so, there was a policing. But at the same time, this was a father trying to do what he thought was right with a very wayward child. A child that really nobody knew how to deal with. I mean, I was a menace and a diabolical in many ways. So, but that doesn't mean that intellectually, philosophically, politically, he would agree with that version of himself. Because when it came down to it, like for example, the column that he did for Indian Express called Point of View, it ran for 25 years every Sunday without a break, some 1,300 columns. And it eventually came to an end when he wrote a column critical of the BJP head and was told very gently by the management of the Indian Express that this kind of critical column would not be encouraged. He resigned that week, Although he stayed on very good terms with Indian Express, he still went to the office. His friends had all worked there. But that was the story behind why that column
Actually,
stopped.
It's a scoop. I don't think anywhere it is reported. It was a normal retirement painted as a goodbye column.
Well, I'm not exactly supposed to have mentioned that, but that's the truth of it.
This is why he's diabolical.
I don't think he would mind the story being out there, though.
Probably not now.
Yeah, but we knew the story, but nobody said that openly till.
Well, maybe it was fiction.
So you have that liberty. That's a good. So.
In the Elsewhereans, there is. You had mentioned about how he was not communicative in the at home, and you find that communication not just breakdown. It was like you had a partial communication at best, but there is in the story you see a breakdown in communication between husband and wife. You see a communication breakdown between father and son. And but at some point later, you also see an attempt to mend fences. You mentioned right now that he'd mellowed over time. So, what was it that brought him back to you, to the family, or at least, of course, it was the absence was something which had become a character, a very strong character in the whole scope of the novel itself. But the attempt to bridge that absence was also evident in the story.
Again, I'm not going to get into the details because that's going to give away how much is fiction and how much isn't. I'm going to leave that for you to figure out. But I will say that my father was a lifelong student of Hindu thought, of Hindu philosophy. A lifelong student. He knew more about the Hindu thinkers than many actual Hindu thinkers, and it was a wide-ranging knowledge. He read thirstily and read throughout his life. His library, it's quite a revelation to see how many books of philosophy and how many books of Hindu thought constituted his library. So he had a very inimitable idea of how to take the trials and the confrontations of daily life. He knew how to let the small things pass, to not let things affect him in a deep way. And I think he had the equanimity of a kind of a yogi in some ways, which unfortunately neither of his children have inherited.
Again, I have a question to Sheba. You both remember T.J. sir as a very strict father who is always humor at home and very disciplinarian and all. When he had a granddaughter, I think your daughter, how was his relationship with granddaughter?
Yeah, it was completely different. It was like a 180-degree turn. I remember when I was working in Dubai, I was working for a paper in Dubai, and 2 months into that job, I called home and I said, it's impossible. Nobody can live and work in the Middle East. The racism here is unbelievable. I'm coming home. So my father said, you can't do that. I would advise you 1 year. You joined in May, stay till May next year. It'll look good on your resume, and it'll also give you time to figure out whether you want to stay or not. You do what you want, but this is what I would advise you to do. I, of course, listened to my dad, stayed for a year, and then ran back at the end of May. Tia, my daughter, was working in Dubai. 4 months into it, she actually called home. Doesn't speak to me, speaks to my dad and says, I'm not happy. He says, you're not happy? You're not happy? Immediately come back. So, there you have it.
And Jeet, my question, TJ's had a settler's life all through his life. Even as kids, the frequent changes of cities and all, did that irritate you, or did you take it as a part of learning process or something?
To supplement that question, there's a quote again, which I would like to put out. Home, anywhere but here. And here applies to everywhere.
No, in fact, I'm really grateful for the kind of life, that peripatetic, very unsettled life that they gave us. Because, we never lived in one place for more than a few years. We traveled all over the place. We made new friendships, new connections, new systems, new networks in each new place. And then eventually came back to India, and it was such an education. To this day, I think the reason I am absolutely comfortable in any city in the world, you can drop me into a city and I'll find my way in a day, is because of that upbringing. And, it also, there was no lessons really. There was no explanation. There was no, saying, okay, we are now in Hong Kong and, you should do this. The culture is like this. They just dropped us in the pool and we found out. We learned to swim. And I'm very, very grateful for that experience.
Yeah, and I'd also like to add, when we talk about absence in the house and, the fact that he wasn't there, he was working like a dog from morning till night. We wouldn't be sitting here, pontificating if it wasn't for the blood, sweat, and tears he put into his career, So I also think this is a man, he passed away at the age of 97. And to have changed, to have allowed himself to change after 50 and become somebody more open, somebody more broad-minded, somebody more willing to listen to, differing opinions, that takes a lot. I don't think this generation is as flexible as that,
That was one point that has amazed even us. Because he had a full-time job. He worked hard in office from morning to evening. And then he found time to do research and bring out very good biographies and all. Everywhere. So how was his schedule? Even at home, he was doing work late into the night and all?
No, when he came home late. When he came home, he didn't, do anything extra. He had time to, sit with my mother, have his food, go to bed. But I remember him saying to somebody, I can't remember who it was, somebody said, I don't have the time. Sorry I didn't do that. I didn't have the time. He said, never,
So you didn't have that.
ever say you didn't have the time. You know? Basically what he's saying is you didn't have the inclination, you had the time. So it's just time management.
Or
You
the
just do what you
inclination was not
want to
strong
do.
enough.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I have
But
to
did
say
he
one-
ever want to be
I have
a
to
novelist?
say one thing. That is,
He is a novelist.
he is a novelist.
dad,
yeah.
yeah.
No, I have to say something. We're talking about my father, but I have to say something about my mother in this story, and that is that they were a team. So he did the work. He worked every day. He worked very hard, earned the money, never earned all that much, but the money, it was my mother who made it grow. She was the businesswoman. She knew how to use money, how to make it grow, how to invest it, where to buy property, how to, and she
But
had an
then
eye.
he was also the one who waited and accepted when the stock market
Yeah,
when
absolutely. Yeah,
when it
yeah.
fell,
Yeah.
and gave space for it to come back. And
She bought property in various cities in India. She bought a piece of land in Bangalore in 1981, and she had an eye. She knew where to buy land. It was quite inexpensive at the time, and in 20 years it just exploded in price. And basically, it's because of her. He just earned the money. He had no sense of money. Also because he was from a Gandhian generation that was actually embarrassed by money. And when he was asked, when he took the job at Indian Express, and he was asked what he wanted as a salary, he asked for 1,001 rupees, which is what he was paid for 25 years. And that's a kind of an arrogance, actually, to say, oh yeah, I'm so good, you can't afford me, just give me 1,001 rupees. Of course, the family would have appreciated a real salary, but it was a gesture, a grand gesture. The point about what my mother did is by investing those small amounts that he earned right from the beginning, she allowed me and my sister to quit our terrible jobs in journalism. I worked in journalism for 20 years, and each year was worse than the one before. I don't know how many years you worked in journalism.
Yeah, it's all a blur.
Yeah, understandably. Selective amnesia sometimes helps. And that the reason that we are now able to not work, and I can spend 4 years writing a novel or 4 days writing a poem, is because of my mother's foresight.
So is that why you have dedicated the Elsewhereans to Ammu George?
But there's also another very powerful or very important character in the story, and that is Marcos, the French connection. So there's Marcos, there's Baudelaire, there's you. Could you throw some light on that connect?
He was a lawyer in Kochi, and the thing that distinguished him in Kochi among his neighbors and his friends and his colleagues was that he was obsessed by the French poet Baudelaire. And he spent his life translating the Flowers of Evil of Fleur du Mal into Malayalam, which is an absolutely insane undertaking. There is no single translation of Fleur du Mal in any language anywhere in the world, because the book is so difficult to translate that it takes more than one translator to translate that book. First of all, to single-handedly translate Fleur du Mal, and secondly, to do it into Malayalam, that is such an enormous and magnificent folly that he became a kind of a legend. And he was a legend in Cochin for another reason. Because of Baudelaire, he became a Francophile, and he was I'm sure, the first house in South India, if not in all of India, to have a bidet in the bathroom. He was that much of a fan of the French, and he had a bidet in every bathroom in his house in Kochi. And so there were two things that actually distinguished him from his contemporaries. One was the fact that he was obsessed with Baudelaire. He had a library with every book by and about Baudelaire in the library. And the other thing he was known for was the car he drove. It was a sea green Morris Minor in Kochi in the 50s. When he drove down the road, you can be sure that every eye watched that car pass. Really a kind of a legend. Even in the family, people were quite afraid of him, and no one could understand the obsession with a 19th century French poet. And of course, when I was 14 and we were on a holiday in Kerala, he introduced me to Baudelaire, which I'm still not sure whether I should be grateful for, because if you introduce a 14-year-old to Baudelaire, you are actually probably
Distorting his mind.
you're probably messing him up for life.
But, so we have very little time left, and I would so love you to be able to read a couple of passages from this. One, of course, would be The Death of Grandfather Thomas, which is page 26 on the novel. I had noted that too, because
I think
it is quite extraordinary.
After that, we can take a few
yeah.
questions from audience.
Yeah, because 5 minutes, that's page 26, the Death of Grandfather Thomas.
It's time, he says. This is the scene of the death of the grandfather. He shuts his eyes and is true to his word. Images flare in his head, flare and slow and flare again. The first time he sees a car, uniformed driver at the wheel, archbishop in the back seat, waving at the baffled villagers. Among them, his headmaster, grinning helplessly, front tooth missing, the title sequence of a Hindi movie, steam train pulling into a station, two riders passing a rocky bluff, Cholet in bright red letters in 3 languages. In the theater, cigarette smoke shot through with beams from the projection room. Learning to milk a cow, the milk frothing in a pan, red and yellow CPI slogans on the mossy walls near the railway station, white hammer and sickle on the station porch. Slowly, deliberately, Raju, the kitchen boy, cuts off a chicken's head. The bird spouts blood on the gravel, running in ever smaller circles, red bulbs shooting from its neck, not knowing it has died, knowing it has died. His first wife's unbending posture on the boat when he sent her back to her parents and lover across the river. She doesn't look back, not once, and for that he's grateful. His own face, unbending, unforgiving, self-punishing, the herd of wild buffalo in the blue hills above Wayanad, distant blue, bluer than the sky, old sludge when the monsoon failed and the river exposed its black intestines, whitened boats of the long drowned, the look in Annie's eyes, brightness fading, fever radiating from her skin, imploring him, imploring her father, knowing she has died. Ammu's baby emerging at 3:40 in the afternoon, 18 and a half hours after labor began, Karup's hands smeared with blood, the 3 women pouring sweat, cord cut, baby bathed and swaddled, the mother too exhausted to hold the newborn, Chachi Amma taking it into her arms, the determined look on her face, the simple wooden cross in the main room of the house, their separate beds, Chachi Amma's face waiting for him on the other side of time. And as he watches the river seep into the floor of the hospital room, green water thick with weeds, mud, river detritus, his bed quickly submerges, the room filling with murky light, quickly, completely submerged. And at the spot where the window was, a square of radiance glows ever brighter, glows until it fills his sight and everything is green. Thank you.
Just wondering, prose or poetry?
Yes,
So-
and the story, it starts with Muatupura, the 3 rivers, and it comes back full circle. And I think on that note, we should open.
Yeah, so I think we have 5-6 minutes, a couple of questions from audience.
My question is to the moderators, like why this obsession with, knowing, like how much percentage is fiction, how much percentage is non-fiction? life. Because let me complete. Amen. So because your generation asked the same question to Kamala Das with Endakada. And do you think this is somehow associated with this literary voyeurism celebrated in your, adolescence?
Position the novel as a documentary novel. So we don't know whether it is a documentary or novel, but I, as a journalist, my job is to find out answers to questions. It's a natural question that comes to my mind. I think every reader will have that question in his mind. I don't think when it is a documentary novel, it's the first question that comes to your mind is how much part is documentary, how much part is novel. That's a natural curiosity, na?
That's not a question that comes to your mind?
No.
My question to you is, how do you assess yourself as a fiction writer, starting from Narcopolis to the current book?
I mean, that's not my job, really. That's your job. But I would just say that Narcopolis is a young man's book. It's about one thing. And I think that I've just widened the enterprise over the 10 years after Narcopolis. And, you have to keep, if you're a writer, you write every day. You can't write the same book again and again, or at least there are people who do that, but I think it's just advisable to write about stories and places and people that are outside your realm, that you might be worried and anxious to write about. Because when you do that, you learn how to write a novel from scratch each time. And I think that just keeps it fresh, at least for me, and if that's the case, I think for the reader as well.
I want to ask you about one of the scenes from the book, Elsewhereans. It didn't really fit in with the rest, but I liked that. It was about the interaction with the German in the bar. And I want to know whether it's true or false, but there was a subtext of alienation there. How, say, India works and how the West works. Can you say a little bit more about that and what you feel about it?
I'll say that the description of the stay in Berlin and the trip to the mountains of Bavaria, all of that is true. So is the interaction with the actor who was reading from Narcopolis. The end is fiction of that chapter, the punch. But I think it was very clear that he wanted to punch me. I just took it forward.
My question to you is, as you mentioned as a poet that your father told you not to write. And the thing that if you tell a poet not to write, they would write. I'm somebody who generally encourages people to write. So my question is, if you were supported, loved, and encouraged to write, do you think you'd not become a poet?
Oh. Wow.
I think that's a great question. I'm pretty certain that if I'd been encouraged and nurtured and said, if my parents had told me, you should write poetry, you would make a good poet. Here are some books, I would have turned against it. So I would have probably become an accountant or, read books of history. So I'm very grateful that they were against poetry.
Hello, Jeet. It is something similar to what she was thinking. So I was thinking like being a rebel and an outcast in your own inner thoughts. So do you think it helped you to become a good writer or a poet or whatever it is? And are you happy about that, the way you are?
I think happiness is overrated. I don't think happiness is generally a possibility. It's not even something to work towards. I'm happy with contentment. And just, I don't even think it's happiness or contentment that I work towards. I just want to do what I think I'm good at and to do the best possible job at it. And I think that's the way for all of us to be, because if you're out to be happy, first of all, how do you bring about happiness? What is happiness? It's something that lasts a minute, a couple of seconds, and then it's gone, and then you try and recreate it. It's just, it's a hard work to, be happy. I think joy is probably a much more realistic state to aspire to, maybe.